As the book of Nehemiah comes to an end, we see the people of Jerusalem striving to walk in obedience to God once again. Nehemiah had led a strong campaign of reform, rebuking those who had married foreign women, confronting Sabbath breakers, and purifying the priesthood. The wall around Jerusalem had been rebuilt. The people had heard the law read to them aloud. The city was slowly regaining its identity under God's covenant. But not all of God's people were living in Jerusalem. Many Jews were still scattered across the Persian Empire, living as exiles and trying to preserve their faith in lands far from Zion. It is during this same Persian period, between the return from exile and the silence before the New Testament, that we turn to a very different story, far from the holy city. This story does not take place in Jerusalem, but in a palace. It is not led by a prophet or priest, but by two unlikely heroes, a Jewish orphan girl and her older cousin. This is the story of Esther. In the days when the mighty Persian Empire ruled the known world, there was a king named Ahasuerus. In Greek, he is known as Xerxes. He ruled over a vast empire that stretched across 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia. His throne was in Shushan, also called Susa, the royal palace in the heart of the Persian kingdom. In the 3rd year of his reign, King Ahasuerus decided to show off his glorious kingdom to his officials and nobles. He invited the princes of all the provinces, his military leaders, and all the powerful men of Persia and Media. For 180 days, that is 6 full months, he displayed his riches, his splendor, his royal glory, and the beauty of his majesty. Everything he had, he revealed to impress his guests. After those 180 days ended, the king made another great feast. This one lasted for 7 days and was for all the people who lived in Shushan the palace, both the important men and the common citizens. The celebration took place in the courtyard of the palace garden. The area was beautifully decorated with white and blue linen hangings, tied with cords of fine purple linen and silver rings on marble pillars. The couches were made of gold and silver, placed on a pavement of red, blue, white, and black marble. Golden goblets were used for wine, and each cup was unique. The wine flowed freely, as much as anyone wanted to drink, and the king had ordered that no one should be forced to drink if they didn't want to. Each man could drink according to his own desire. The king's servants were there to serve as much or as little as each guest wished. Meanwhile, Queen Vashti, the king's wife, also made a feast for the women in the royal palace of King Ahasuerus. Her banquet was separate from the men's, as was the custom. Now, on the 7th day of the feast, when the king's heart was merry with wine, he commanded 7 of his eunuchs, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, who served in his presence, to bring Queen Vashti before him. He wanted her to wear her royal crown and show her beauty to the people and princes, because she was very beautiful. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command. She would not obey the order that was delivered by the eunuchs. This was not only a personal rejection, it was a public humiliation. The king was enraged. His pride had been wounded in front of all his nobles. King Ahasuerus turned to his wise men, the ones who understood the times and the laws, for advice. These men were experts in Persian law and sat near the king as his advisors. Their names were Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marsena, and Memucan, 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had special access to the king and were the highest in rank in the kingdom. The king asked them, "What should we do to Queen Vashti according to the law, because she has not obeyed my command delivered by the eunuchs?" Then Memucan, one of the princes, spoke up in the presence of the king and the other nobles. He said, "Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but she has also offended all the princes and all the people throughout the entire kingdom. If this becomes known, all the women will start to disrespect their husbands. They will say, 'King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to come before him, but she refused.' And then women everywhere, rich or poor, will begin to dishonor their husbands, leading to conflict and disrespect in every home. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let a royal command be sent out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and Medes, so that it cannot be changed. Vashti is never again to appear before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her a royal position over someone better than her. When this law is made public throughout the entire kingdom, which is vast, then all women will honor their husbands, whether they are great or humble." The king liked this advice. So did all the other princes. The king did what Memucan advised. He sent letters to every province in the empire, to each province in its script, and to every people in their language. The decree stated that every man should be the ruler in his own house and speak in the language of his people. After some time had passed, and the king's anger had calmed down, he remembered Vashti and what she had done, and what had been decreed against her. Though he had banished her, the absence of the queen left a space in the court and his heart. Then the king's servants who attended to him suggested, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king. Let the king appoint officers in every province of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young women to the palace in Shushan. Bring them into the women's quarters under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, the keeper of the women. Let beauty treatments be given to them. Then, let the young woman who pleases the king become queen instead of Vashti." This idea pleased the king, so he gave the order to carry it out. Now, in the fortress of Shushan, there was a Jew named Mordecai. He was the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Mordecai had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives who were taken with King Jeconiah of Judah, when Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had exiled them. Though he lived far from his ancestral land, Mordecai remained faithful to his people. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah. That was her Hebrew name. She was also called Esther. She was an orphan. Her father and mother had died. Mordecai had taken her in and raised her as his daughter. Esther was very beautiful, graceful, and lovely to look at. When the king's order was announced, and many young women were gathered and brought to the palace, Esther was also taken into the custody of Haggai, the keeper of the women. Right away, she found favor with Haggai. He treated her kindly and gave her special beauty preparations, extra food, and assigned her 7 female attendants chosen from the king's court. He also gave her the best place in the women's quarters. But Esther did not reveal that she was a Jew or tell anyone about her family background, because Mordecai had told her not to. Every day, Mordecai would walk near the courtyard of the women's house to find out how Esther was doing and what was happening to her. The process for the women was long. Before a young woman could go in to see the king, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatment, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and other cosmetics. Only after this full preparation could she appear before the king. When it was a young woman's turn to go into the king, she was allowed to take whatever she wanted from the women's quarters. She would go in during the evening and return the next morning to another part of the harem under the care of Shashgaz, the king's other eunuch, who oversaw the concubines. From that point on, she would not return to the king unless he was especially pleased with her and summoned her by name. When Esther's turn came, the daughter of Abihail, Mordecai's uncle, who had raised her, she asked for nothing except what Haggai advised. And Esther found favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in the royal palace, in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women. She pleased him and gained his favor more than all the other virgins. So he placed the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king then made a great feast for all his officials and servants, a banquet in honor of Esther. He declared a holiday throughout the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Later, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, he discovered a plot. Two of the king's eunuchs, Bigthan and Teresh, who guarded the door, became angry and planned to kill King Ahasuerus. But Mordecai found out and told Queen Esther, and Esther reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. When the matter was investigated and found to be true, the two eunuchs were hanged on the gallows, and the incident was recorded in the Book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. After the events of chapter 2, where Mordecai saved the king's life and it was written in the royal records but no reward was given, another man began to rise in power. His name was Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. King Ahasuerus promoted Haman and gave him a high position above all the other princes and officials who served the king. As part of this honor, the king commanded that all the royal servants at the king's gate should bow down and pay respect to Haman. This was the official command given by the king himself. And so, whenever Haman passed by, the servants would bow low and show him honor. But there was one man who would not bow, Mordecai. He stood firm and refused to bend his knee to Haman. The royal servants at the king's gate noticed this and asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they asked him again, but he would not listen to them. Mordecai had told them that he was a Jew. That was his reason for not bowing. Eventually, they reported Mordecai's behavior to Haman to see if Mordecai's explanation would be accepted. They wanted to know if Mordecai's faith as a Jew gave him the right to ignore the king's order. When Haman saw with his own eyes that Mordecai did not bow down or show him respect, he was filled with rage. But to kill Mordecai alone didn't seem like enough. When Haman learned that Mordecai was a Jew, he decided to destroy all the Jews throughout the entire kingdom of King Ahasuerus. He wanted to wipe out not just one man, but an entire people. In the 12th year of King Ahasuerus' reign, in the first month, which is called Nisan, Haman cast pur, that is, he cast lots, to determine the best day and month to carry out his plan. The lot fell on the 12th month, which is called Adar. Then Haman went before the king and spoke to him. He said, "There is a certain group of people scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. They are different from everyone else. Their laws are different, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be written that they should be destroyed. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the royal treasury to cover the cost for those who carry out the destruction." The king took off his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. The king said to him, "The money is yours, and the people are yours to do with as you see fit." Then the king's secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of the first month. Everything Haman said was written down and sent as official letters to the king's governors, to the princes of every province, and to the leaders of every people. The letters were written in the script and language of each province and sealed with the king's signet ring. They were sent to all 127 provinces. The letters commanded that all Jews, young and old, children and women, were to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated on one single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is Adar. Their possessions were to be taken as plunder. Copies of the letter were sent to every province, giving the people time to prepare for that day. A decree was issued in Shushan, the capital, just as it was everywhere else. Then the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was in confusion. The people were troubled. The Jews were in danger, and no one could understand why such a terrible command had been issued. When Mordecai learned everything that had happened, he tore his clothes in grief. He put on sackcloth and ashes, a public sign of mourning and sorrow. Then he went out into the city, crying loudly and bitterly. He stopped at the king's gate because no one wearing sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province where the king's decree and order had reached, there was great mourning among the Jews. They fasted. They wept. They lamented. Many lay down in sackcloth and ashes. It was a time of desperation. When Esther's maids and her eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, she was deeply troubled. She didn't know why her cousin, the one who had raised her, was in such visible distress. So she sent clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of the sackcloth, hoping he would put them on. But he refused. Then Esther called for Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs who had been assigned to attend to her. She told him to go to Mordecai and find out what was going on and why he was acting this way. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city, which was in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything. He told him about the money Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hathach a copy of the written decree that had been issued in Shushan, commanding their death. Mordecai asked him to show the decree to Esther and explain it to her. Then he told Hathach to instruct Esther to go into the king, to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach returned to Esther and told her everything Mordecai had said. Esther replied with a message of her own. She instructed Hathach to say to Mordecai, "All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know this law. If anyone, man or woman, goes to the king in the inner court without being summoned, they will be put to death, unless the king holds out his golden scepter to them. Only then will they live. And I have not been called to go to the king for 30 days. When Mordecai heard this, he sent back a message that changed everything. He said, "Do not think that because you live in the king's palace you will escape when the rest of the Jews are destroyed. If you remain silent at this time, deliverance and rescue for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows, perhaps you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." These words struck Esther deeply. She sent her reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews in Shushan. Tell them to fast for me. Do not eat or drink anything for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will fast in the same way. Then I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did everything Esther had instructed him. On the 3rd day of the fast, Esther rose with determination in her heart. She dressed in her royal garments, not just for beauty, but as a sign of purpose. She was about to risk her life. Carefully, she walked toward the inner court of the king's palace, standing in the place directly opposite the king's throne room. The king was sitting on his royal throne, facing the entrance of the hall. When King Ahasuerus looked up and saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he immediately noticed her. She found favor in his eyes. The moment that changed everything happened. He reached out and held out the golden scepter that was in his hand, the symbol of mercy and acceptance. Esther stepped forward and touched the tip of the scepter. She was no longer in danger. She had been received. Then the king said to her, "What is it, Queen Esther? What do you want? Even if it is half the kingdom, it will be given to you." But Esther did not ask for her people's deliverance just yet. She was wise. She replied, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for him." The king did not hesitate. He commanded quickly, "Bring Haman at once, so that we may do as Esther has asked." So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. As they sat and drank wine, the king again asked Esther, "What is your request?" "It shall be granted to you. What is your desire? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be done." But Esther said, "This is my request and my desire. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, let the king and Haman come to another banquet that I will prepare for them tomorrow. Then I will do as the king has said." Haman left the banquet that day full of joy and feeling honored. His heart was lifted with pride. He had been invited to a private banquet with the queen, and only the king and himself were present. But when Haman passed through the king's gate, he saw Mordecai again. And Mordecai did not rise. He did not tremble in fear. He did not move from his place. He simply sat, refusing to show Haman the respect he demanded. And suddenly Haman's joy turned to fury. Still he controlled himself and went home. There he called for his friends and for Zeresh, his wife. Surrounded by them, Haman began to boast. He spoke about his great wealth, the number of sons he had, and all the ways the king had honored him and promoted him above all other officials. Then he added, "And Queen Esther invited no one but me to come with the king to the banquet she prepared. And again, tomorrow I am invited by her along with the king." But his voice changed. His pride soured. "Yet all this means nothing to me," he said, "as long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made, 50 cubits high, that is 75 feet tall. In the morning, ask the king to have Mordecai hanged on it, then go happily with the king to the banquet." This idea pleased Haman. He ordered the gallows to be built. That night, the king could not sleep. We are not told why. Was it a restlessness in his spirit? Was it God working in silence? Whatever the reason, the king gave an order to bring the book of the records, the chronicles of his reign, and to read them to him. Perhaps he thought the old reports of palace matters might make him drowsy, but what was read to him would change everything. As the servant read aloud, he came to the record of an event long forgotten, how Mordecai had uncovered a plot by Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who had guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Mordecai had reported it, and the two men had been executed. It had been recorded faithfully in the official chronicles. Then the king stopped the reading. He asked, "What honor or reward has been given to Mordecai for this?" The servants answered, "Nothing has been done for him." At that very moment, early in the morning, Haman entered the outer court of the king's palace. He had come to ask the king to hang Mordecai on the gallows he had just built. But before Haman could speak, the king spoke first. "Who is in the court?" he asked. The servants answered, "Haman is standing in the court." "Let him come in," said the king. So Haman entered, and the king, without giving Haman a chance to speak about Mordecai, asked him, "What should be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought to himself, "Who would the king want to honor more than me?" So, filled with his own pride, Haman said to the king, "For the man whom the king delights to honor, let a royal robe be brought, one the king himself has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest on its head. Let these be given to one of the king's most noble officials. Let him dress the man in the royal garments, and let him lead him through the city on the king's horse, proclaiming before him, 'This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry, take the robe and the horse, just as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not leave out anything that you have suggested." Haman's heart must have collapsed inside him, but he had no choice. He took the robe and the horse, dressed Mordecai in royal clothes, and led him through the city square, crying out the very words that he had imagined would be for himself. "This is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, calmly and with dignity. But Haman rushed home, his head covered in grief and shame. He told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened. And this time they did not flatter him. His wife and his wise friends gave him a sobering word. "If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him. You will surely fall before him." While they were still speaking, the king's eunuchs arrived and quickly brought Haman away to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the second banquet came. Just as Queen Esther had requested, King Ahasuerus and Haman returned to dine with her. They sat again in the private setting of the queen's feast, where rich food and royal wine flowed. As they drank together, the king turned to Esther and asked her again, this time with increasing seriousness, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it shall be done." This was the moment. Esther had fasted. She had waited. She had wisely delayed. And now the time had come to speak. She answered the king with both courage and humility. She said, "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me at my request, and the lives of my people at my petition. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be wiped out. If we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace, because no trouble like that would be worthy of bothering the king." The king's face hardened with fury. "Who is he? Where is the one who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, with her eyes surely fixed and her voice steady, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." Haman froze. His heart sank. He was terrified before the king and queen. The tables had turned in an instant. Then the king arose in wrath from the banquet of wine. His face burning, he left the room and went into the palace garden. He needed a moment to think, to breathe, to decide what should be done. But Haman stayed. He knew his life now depended on the mercy of the queen. Haman stood and begged Queen Esther for his life. He threw himself down where she reclined on the couch. But as he pleaded with her, just as the king returned from the garden into the house of wine, he saw Haman falling on the couch where Esther was sitting. The king shouted, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As soon as the words left the king's mouth, the royal servants covered Haman's face, marking him for death. Then one of the eunuchs present, Harbona, spoke up. He said, "Look! The gallows 75 feet high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing by Haman's house." The king replied immediately, "Hang him on it." So they took Haman and hanged him on the very gallows he had built for Mordecai. Then the king's anger cooled, and the tension that filled the palace was released. That same day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house and property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Everything that had belonged to Haman now belonged to the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, because Esther had revealed how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, the very same one he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Then Esther placed Mordecai in charge of Haman's house. What a reversal! The man who once sat at the gate in sackcloth was now holding the king's seal and managing the estate of his enemy. But the danger was not over. The decree to destroy the Jews still stood. Persian law could not be undone with a simple cancellation. The king's original command had been sealed and distributed. it was still in effect. So once more, Esther came before the king. She fell at his feet. She wept. She begged him to stop the evil plan of Haman the Agagite, the scheme he had plotted against the Jews. Again the king held out the golden scepter to Esther. She rose and stood before him. She said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before you, and if the thing seems right in the king's eyes, and if I am pleasing in your sight, let it be written to reverse the letters, the plot devised by Haman, which he wrote to destroy the Jews in all the provinces of the king. For how can I endure the calamity that will come upon my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my relatives?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Indeed, I have given Haman's house to Esther, and he has been hanged on the gallows because he tried to lay hands on the Jews. Now you may write a decree concerning the Jews in the king's name as you please. Seal it with the king's signet ring, for whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring cannot be revoked." So the king's scribes were summoned at once, on the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan. A new decree was written, just as Mordecai instructed. It was sent to the Jews, to the satraps, to the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all. The letters were written in the script of each province and the language of each people, including the Jews, in their language and writing. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed the letters with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mounted couriers on swift horses that had been specially bred from the royal stables. In the new decree, the king granted the Jews in every city the right to gather and defend their lives. They could destroy, kill, and wipe out any armed group that might attack them, including their enemies' wives and children, and to plunder their possessions. This was to be done on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the very same day Haman had chosen for their destruction. A copy of the decree was sent out as law to every province. It was displayed publicly so that the Jews would be ready on that day and would not be taken by surprise. The messengers rode out swiftly, mounted on royal horses. The command was urgent. The decree was also proclaimed in the fortress of Shushan. Then Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. The man who had once wept in sackcloth was now clothed like nobility, and the city of Shushan rejoiced and celebrated. Where once there had been confusion, now there was gladness. For the Jews there was light and joy, gladness and honor, and in every province, in every city, wherever the king's new command reached, the Jews rejoiced. They held feasts and celebrated. Many people of the land became Jews themselves because fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. So the 12th month arrived, the month of Adar, and the dreaded 13th day came. This was the day that the king's original decree had named as the day the enemies of the Jews would overpower them. But now, because of the second decree written by Mordecai, everything had changed. The tables were turned. On that day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to destroy them, but instead the Jews gained the upper hand over those who hated them. In every city, in every province of the kingdom of King Ahasuerus, the Jews gathered together in their towns to defend themselves. They united as one people. No one could stand against them, for fear of the Jews had fallen on all the people. Even the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the royal administrators assisted the Jews. Why? Because the fear of Mordecai had come upon them. Mordecai had become a powerful man in the king's palace. His reputation had spread throughout the provinces. His influence grew greater and greater. People had once seen him as just a Jew at the king's gate, but now they knew he carried the king's authority. So the Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword. They killed and destroyed those who hated them. They did whatever they needed to defend themselves and protect their people. In the citadel of Shushan alone, the Jews killed 500 men. And along with them, they killed the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. Their names were Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaizatha. These 10 sons had inherited their father's hatred, but now their names were recorded for justice, not power. They were killed, but the Jews did not lay their hands on any of the plunder. They took no personal gain. That same day, the king received the report from the citadel of Shushan, the tally of the dead. He said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in the citadel of Shushan, along with the 10 sons of Haman. What must they have done in the rest of the provinces? Now, what is your petition? It shall be granted. What is your request? It shall be done." Then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let the Jews in Shushan be allowed to do tomorrow what they have done today, and let the 10 sons of Haman be hanged on the gallows." The king agreed, and the order was given. So the 10 sons of Haman were hanged. And on the 14th day of Adar, the Jews in Shushan again gathered together and killed 300 more men. Still, they did not take any plunder. Meanwhile, the Jews in the other provinces also gathered to defend themselves. They gained relief from their enemies and killed 75,000 of those who hated them. Yet again, they took no spoil, no possessions, and no personal wealth from their enemies. This all happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th day, those in the provinces rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. But the Jews in Shushan had fought on both the 13th and the 14th days. So they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of joyful celebration. This is why the Jews who live in unwalled towns throughout the provinces observe the 14th day of the month of Adar as a day of joy and feasting, a time for celebration and giving gifts to one another. Then Mordecai wrote down everything that had happened. He sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, telling them to establish a yearly tradition. He told them to celebrate the 14th and 15th days of Adar every year, just as they had celebrated now. These days were to be remembered as the time when the Jews gained rest from their enemies. It was the month that had been turned from sorrow into joy, from mourning into a celebration. So they were to make them days of feasting and joy, of giving gifts to each other and also giving presents to the poor. And the Jews accepted this instruction. They agreed to continue the celebration just as Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted to destroy them. He had cast the pur, or the lot, to determine the best day to annihilate them. But when Esther came before the king and exposed Haman's plot, the king gave orders in writing that the evil plan Haman had devised against the Jews should fall back on his own head. And so Haman and his sons were hanged on the gallows. Because of this, the Jews called the celebration Purim, after the word pur. Therefore, because of everything written in this letter and everything they had seen and experienced, the Jews firmly established the practice and made a binding commitment for themselves, for their descendants, and for all who would join them in the future. They committed never to fail in observing these 2 days every year, according to the written time and schedule. And these days of Purim would be remembered and kept in every generation, by every family, in every province and city. And these days would never cease to be celebrated among the Jews, nor would the memory of them ever fade among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. They sent letters of peace and truth to all the Jews in the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, urging them to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and as they had established for themselves and their descendants in matters of fasting and lamentation. So the command of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written down in the records. And King Ahasuerus imposed a tribute on the land and the islands of the sea. His reign continued strong, and his influence extended far. Everything he did in power and might, along with the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, whom the king had promoted, was written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus. He was great among the Jews and well respected by the multitude of his brothers. He sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his descendants. This is the end. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It helps share God's word with more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on powerful biblical teachings. Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless you.